Hello, Archie Hunters. This is Amanda Ferber. I'm the founder, CEO, and publisher of Architecture Hunter. And today we are hosting another episode of our webinar series, an initiative that has now been running for over a year and continues to grow, reinforcing what we consider our fourth pillar, education. Our commitment is to provide content that is relevant, accessible, and truly didactic for our global audience. As many of you know, each month at Architecture Hunter, we define a central theme that guides our editorial direction across some of the content, our newsletters, and eventually our webinars. So, the theme of the month always becomes the foundation for our live conversations as well. For February, the theme is Radical Sustainability Building for a Living Planet. At the beginning of the month, I share an editorial reflection in our newsletter questioning something that feels increasingly urgent. Sustainability is no longer a differentiator, it's the baseline. Designing buildings that simply do less harm is not enough anymore. The real challenge is asking, what can architecture actively give back? How can it restore ecosystems, strengthen the communities, and generate positive impact? And that is precisely why today's webinar matters so much because we are moving from reflection into practice. So today we are honored to welcome Professor Claudia Pasquero and Dr. Marco Poletto, co-founders of Ecologic Studio. And in our second block, we'll also hear from Michael Green, founder of Michael Green Architecture. So just a quick reminder of how today's sessions will work. We'll begin with the first presentation block, followed by a few minutes of Q&A so you can engage directly with our speakers. You can submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box, either during the presentations or at the end. And our colleague, Rafaela Galafassi, editorial coordinator at Architecture Hunter, will be moderating the questions and guiding the discussion with our guests. And before we begin, a quick announcement. In just 4 days, we'll open pre-registration for the Architecture Hunter Awards, our annual international prize. So make sure to stay tuned to our Instagram, especially the official awards account, as we'll be sharing important updates and information there in the coming days. This year, we're bringing together an exceptional international jury representing all continents, and the award continues to grow stronger with each edition. We would love to see your projects there. So now, without further ado, let's officially welcome our first speakers, Professor Claudia Pasquero and Dr. Marco Poletto are internationally recognized architects and researchers pioneering climate active design systems that merge biology, computation, and architecture. As co-founders of the Ecologic Studios and creators of Photosynthetica, they develop algae-based living infrastructures capable of capturing CO2, purifying air, and generating biomass. Their work has been showcased globally, including the Venice Architecture Biennale, COP26, and the Centre Pompidou. Dr. Marco Poletto is a leading voice in biodesign and climate responsive architecture, author of Biodesign in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Deep Green, and has taught at institutions such as the Architectural Association, the Bartlett, Cornell University, and the IAAC Barcelona. And Professor Claudia Pasquero is chair of landscape architecture at the University of Innsbruck, founder of the Synthetic Landscape Lab, and also leads research at the Bartlett. Her work positions architecture as a living system, one that makes ecological performance visible. So, Professor Claudia, Dr. Marco, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, super. So today it's me, and Claudia is I think traveling somewhere in the world. So I will be the one that hopefully covering both roles today. But
Okay, no problem.
I hope you will enjoy what I'm going to show.
Definitely.
I'm trying to share the screen right now so that we can get going.
Yes, we cannot see it yet.
Okay, I'm on that, but of course, Claudia and myself, or Professor Pasquale and myself, are the founder of Ecologic Studio, which is practice that has started about 20 years ago, believe it or not, and in a time in which the word sustainability was obviously already been discussed, but maybe it still had or still hold a kind of significant meaning in terms of thinking ecologically, thinking systemically. Whereas today, I think many of us have the feeling that it kind of requires a reframing, if you want, which I think it's a great thing that you have decided to take on that challenge in this month or in this series with the idea of thinking how can we rethink sustainability from a perspective that makes it more relevant today once again. We tried to talk about that in our book, which is called Deep Green, Biodesign in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which is published by Routledge. I think you can find it online and on the website of Routledge or our website. And I think the book, it's kind of presenting the last 10 years of our work, but also very much our attempt to reassess the relevance of talking about sustainability and designing sustainable architecture. And we sort of concluded that there are a few key ingredients that for us really matter when we talk about sustainability, which perhaps were not necessarily part of its original definition. And one element is beauty, or the kind of aesthetic dimension of sustainability, and particularly the idea that beauty may be a kind of revealing factor in what we call ecological intelligence. So in other words, aesthetics and ethics not necessarily separate, but perhaps more like two coins of the same metal. And of course, there is technology, which is probably the most commonly understood aspect or paradigm of sustainable design. But we think of technology as something that is much more enmeshed with nature itself. So we're talking about the new technology of nature as a fundamental ingredient of what we may call radical sustainability. And finally, I would say a philosophical dimension, and that's why I use the term dark ecology here, which is obviously borrowed from Timothy Morton and his book, but really the whole paradigm of object-oriented ontology, on top of which that is founded and really has become more and more relevant in our discussions around nature, and especially in the way our human designed world may interact or even co-evolve with the non-human side of it. And so I would just dive straight away into one of our latest project that we presented last year in Venice for the Biennale of Architecture. And this is a project that essentially attempted to think about Venice in maybe several decades in the future, where as predicted, will become submerged, and therefore water will not only permeate some of its streets, but very much all its interiors and architectures. And we asked the lagoon itself and the organisms that populates the lagoon what would be their vision of Venice in that future. And so in a way, the project was very much about using AI as a kind of interface to almost give voice to the modern human that characterizes the Venice lagoon in kind of imagining the future of Venice. And this is a quote that was kind of generated as part of the video. And it says, "I don't run on code, I flow with tides. I thicken your foundations when the salt rises. I dream new land." So this slide was supposed to be a video, which is obviously not playing. Probably this is not my lucky day.
The fundamental AI
Can
protocol,
you see it playing?
not
Maybe?
your crisp, clean silicon deity, humming with the
Great.
logic of the optimal. No, this one is also down there, oozing into the very stuff of the Venice lagoon. Embedded, you see, veiled like truth itself, always already calcified, crusted over with the microbial thingness of it all. AI bio, the dot itself, a sticky point, a refusal of easy categories, not constructed but grown, a generative ooze, a viscous algorithm slithering through the deep, a symbiotic becoming with the very microbiome, that teeming unknowable other within the other.
No prompts here. The human insistence on telling is utterly irrelevant. Fundamental AI listens, not to data streams, those sterile abstractions, but to the slosh and the murmur, the infinitesimal shifts in pH, the salty tongue of salinity, the languid drag of temperature. Redox.
So the video lasted several minutes, and it was being played live at the Biennale, and this was the actual presentation that you could find there as a kind of materialized or embodied version of this type of vision. But essentially what became also an interesting experiment for us was really to involve the audience and the visitors in the process. So there was a QR code there that you could scan and then access the fundamental AI bot, where you would allowed or you would be able to introduce your own photos or your own words, and essentially contribute to the evolution of this vision. So it was very much a kind of a interface, a spatial visual interface between the lagoon and the inhabitants and the visitors of Venice and the Biennale itself. So as data molecules and cells becomes materials of design, architecture is now defined by an evolving collection of spatial protocols of computation and of practices of cultivation. This is very much the reality we are immersed within today. And I think this is something that we have not only accepted as a kind of foundation of our recent work, but very much we think it's the new reality within which the definition of sustainability must be updated. We are no longer thinking about the realm of nature and biology as a separate from the realm of architecture, design, and digital technologies.
One of the most significant aspects of contemporary technological evolution is its inevitable convergence with living nature. 3.1 celebrates this epochal transition. On the one hand, it is a living tree, our most potent symbol of nature. On the other, it embodies a new kind of technological life, designed by artificial intelligence and biodigitally grown. 3.1 has the same photosynthetic and carbon capturing potential of a small forest. It metabolizes and stores the carbon molecules into its 3D printed bioplastic structure while releasing oxygen in the atmosphere. Its main structure is a 3D voxel grid developed by a trained AI algorithm whose recognition of arboreal systems negotiates the logic of the architectural column, the new archetype of Habitat 1. The trunk and canopy are robotically 3D printed with algae-based biopolymers derived from the harvest of the same living photosynthetic microalgae cultures that grow within its 42 glass reactors. The mechanical strength of its biodegradable structure is derived entirely from its unique pleated morphology, inspired by the fibrous trunks of actual trees. The production of Tree One as a carbon-neutral and zero-waste structure required the setting up of a global informational system capable of running a remote fabrication process involving 4 industrial robots and 20 large-scale 3D printing machines. Moreover, the custom software and hardware was developed to adjust the morphology and the printing process in order to eliminate the need for support material, as well as to accommodate the material properties of algae-based biodegradable polymers. This process demonstrates how digital and automotive technology can be used to manufacture the bioarchitectural components. Tree One is the testimony of the dawn of a new technological era where the contemporary digital and robotic infrastructure is repurposed to fabricate or grow soft, wet, living biodigital products. The Age of Habitat 1.
So we come to believe and to consider that a synthetically designed and grown tree, it is not qualitatively different from a natural, let's say, biological tree. I mean, in the end of the day, they both are photosynthetically active. In this case, the photosynthesis is provided by microalgae. They are both made of compostable, biodegradable material of biological origins. Only this one is 3D printed. And in a way, they are both generated in terms of their morphology. Only this one is created by code. But in the end, if the two become part of a similar design world, a similar design interface, that really gives us the possibility to think architecture as something that is no longer separate from the biosphere. So the urban sphere itself, as we like to call it, our cities are in fact part of these hybrid cyber-organic networks, as we like to call it. And so when we dive deeply into a forest, we are essentially losing ourselves into a multiplicity of interconnecting processes that define its very existence, and within it, our own identity. And that's what makes walking in nature, for example, beautiful and rewarding and exciting. But at the same time, we can say that in our contemporary world, these processes are also digital. So they're a combination of biological and digital, or biodigital. And both us and the forest are cyber-organic networks. Like the slime mold, it serves as both a woodland fungus and a biological computer, a form of wetware AI infrastructure with the capacity to plan a city. So the beauty of this is that design is not only helping us to kind of change the way architecture can interact with the living world, but also very much in the way we think about nature itself, which I believe is one of the key shifts that are necessary if we want to talk about sustainability today in a meaningful way. It's not just the way we think about the built environment. It's also the way we think about nature that is evolving. And of course, including ourselves. We are nature, we are part of it. We are also a biosphere, a microbiome. We are hosting billions of organisms within ourselves. So in the end, the boundaries are shifting, and this is what I think makes it an exciting time to be able to engage with this paradigm once again. This project is called Deep Forest. It was commissioned by the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Copenhagen. It's been a beautiful journey working with them on what was, in fact, a kind of, let's say, a summary of our work of the past 15, 20 years. So the museum asked us to present our paradigm of architecture to the audience of Copenhagen. And in the end, they gave us a room, a space that we were able to turn into an immersive environment, into an immersive experience. So we started from a kind of zoom out. So the plan of the room, the plan of the space of the museum became effectively the kind of regional map where, of the territory surrounding the museum itself. So the center of the room being the location of the museum. And so that kind of gave us the possibility to start playing with a generative process that really treated this indoor space as a landscape or as a forest itself, where, contour lines and then different material properties of the ground that we were able to analyze and extract from the satellite were turned into the spatial characteristics of the space itself, and including this kind of network mycelium inspired that would grow on the ground of the room itself, and these little islands that begin to populate the space and host the different projects and work. Ultimately, the forest was really not only a metaphor here, but we tried to recreate this kind of circular process of growth and but also of dissolution and deconstruction and decomposition that you find in real forests, and kind of define the space as such. And so we started by introducing 40 photosynthesizers or bioreactor with living cultures, and that would essentially grow biomass and produce oxygen in the room itself. And they were connected by an aeration system that would bring, let's say, dirty air rich in CO2 from the room, from the exhale of visitors, and pump it into the reactors to feed the algae, which in turn would generate oxygen for visitors to breathe. And that was actually happening in real time for the whole period of more than 6 months, which the exhibition lasted. We also had 138 carbon storing trunks. These were actually supporting network structures of real tree trunks that we salvaged from the woodlands surrounding the museum itself. I don't know if you are familiar with Louisiana, stands in a beautiful setting just outside Copenhagen. And so it's kind of rich of woodland life around it. So we kind of brought them in and integrate them with a series of digitized and 3D printed version of these trees, also made with algae biomass. So the biomass that we were growing in the reactor all of a sudden was becoming the kind of scaffolding for these synthetic trees. And these then were made to host mycelium cultures like fungi that would grow and essentially feed on the biomass itself for the period of time. And of the exhibition, so in 6 months, you started to see these synthetic trunks transforming with this kind of white pattern of the typical of the mycelium growing within the brown substratum, which is in this case was spent coffee grounds. So essentially waste material that became nutritious substratum for the cultures. And again, this whole material logics was organized following the maps that we saw at the beginning to create quite literally a kind of a synthetic forest within the gallery space, which visitors were able to venture in. And this is the overall effects, something in between a laboratory and an actual forest, and with the floor really providing the actual system, aeration system to the whole installation, while also guiding visitors within the kind of paths where different contents and projects were exhibited. So you could then just sit on the ground and listen to videos and look at the models and so on, while also experiencing the effect of being lost into this immersive space. And we then also began to wonder whether this kind of spatial logic could become effectively a way of designing interior spaces that could be used. And so this evolved into a second exhibition, like a smaller one, that was presented in the Triennale in Milano, and just closed actually a month ago. So until very recently, it was exhibited in Milano. And this was presenting the same logic, but in a more compact form, as a kind of room where you could study and spend your time, and where the walls of the room were substituted by this kind of filtering tree-like system, again integrating oxygen-producing cultures of algae and leaving mycelium degraders. And so again, you're very much using the space, but also you are kind of contributing to its own metabolism, and in turn, your walls, your room, your elements surrounding you contribute to yourself. And so it becomes a sort of new symbiosis, if you want, where the boundaries are very much inseparable. And of course, as you can see, all of these projects, despite being, let's say, speculative in nature, they are also for us a very important platform that we can use to test design techniques and design details and develop real prototypes, real material systems that we can then apply in our build projects. So they are not really meant to be metaphorical as such. In our case, they are test beds for a new kind of architecture to come. So again, the topic of radical sustainability for us emerges really where algae grow beside algorithms, and prototypes become civic experiments. So in a continuous rehearsal of cohabitation with the modern human world. In this ecology of design intelligence, creativity is the art of learning to think, build, and evolve with synthetic life itself. So it's really not about definitions for us, but it's about the actual processes that we are able to set in motion and that we become part of inevitably. And so this type of idea of being inextricably part of our design project became the kind of inspiring thought to create this space, the Design Apothecary, which is a project we completed in Torino last year, and it's also now our new base in Torino. I wouldn't want to call it studio or office, because actually it's much more of an hybrid space where we can effectively live. So it's a domestic space in a way. It's also an exhibition space, is a research space, is a productive space. So it kind of brings together all of these elements. But what is interesting for us is that it is very much a space that we are inevitably brought into reshape with our actions every day. So it's a very participatory space, and not just for us, our families, our colleagues, but also for people that visit us there, clients, students, and all the other let's say followers that are part of our network of relationships and creative practices. This is the drawing, the plan drawing, and what really you can see very clearly is that at the center of it there is a quite prominent set of green dots, which are of course our algae reactors. And so there is an algae farm that is really the core of the house, right? So that's where the whole process, the whole metabolic process of the apothecary starts. And so you can see it here photographed from the back. And this space is the more flexible part of the space that we use also for exhibitions or for workshops. And then there are some more private areas, which are also flexible and can be used in different ways. These are obviously our two kids. I wouldn't say kids anymore, to be honest. They are our teenager son and daughter, and they are very much part of these, in terms of how they contribute daily to the practices that are taking place in the space when we are there. And so the area of what could be a dining room or kitchen, quickly transforms into a lab when it's necessary, and again opens up directly onto the cultivation and the algae reactors. And I'm sure you can spot and you can see in these projects that there are elements that were present in some of the exhibitions you saw before, such as the reactors or 3D printing, detailing. But of course, here they have become a fully developed and engineered building system. And so, we tried very much to maintain that kind of a crafty feel. They are all reversible. There is no glue, no screw. You can dismantle, separate all the material. Everything can be moved and reused. But at the same time, of course, they are also functional to the point in which we can use them every day and consistently for a long period of time. So they are actually very much now what we call a kind of new system of architecture, the photosynthetic system. And here there is another image of the main exhibition space. So this type of development obviously gave us the opportunity to really begin to develop this type of photosynthetic architecture in a series of projects that we did in collaboration with several companies, which became connected to us and as clients, but I would say also as co-creators and co-developers in many cases. So this is, for example, the Air Office in the Helion headquarters in Nyon in Switzerland, where we quite literally built a similar algae farm room right in the center of the office space, so that from your desk you can look inside into this kind of interior garden. You can also go inside of it to work or chat and relax, and at the same time the algae are providing this continuous purification as well, and sort of bubbling sound that kind of relaxes and brings the feeling of nature, of living nature in the office space. The material system is very similar. The reactors themselves are patented, and they are our own design innovation element, whereas the timber structure is a very simple lattice, which can be developed in different ways. Here, for example, you see another version of the air garden. He is in London headquarters. You see perhaps the St. Paul in the background there. It's on Bankside. And it's here the timber is a little bit more precious in terms of the type of it. It's been treated a little bit more carefully in terms of the realization. It's a bit more high-end, but the system is the same, and the whole logic of reversibility, craftsmanship, and of course the biotechnological core, the active core is there, sitting comfortably in this that is now a very much used day-to-day office environment. So for me, these images are very exciting, not just because we are happy that people are now enjoying this type of biophilic approach to design, but also because it shows that this is no longer the future. It's something that can be enjoyed now, and most importantly, it is not just about having it there as an object in the background, but it's really about transforming spaces into communal areas of co-creation. Oftentimes the staff and the employees of these companies are involved in the process itself of harvesting, maintaining, in some cases even consuming the nutritious biomass that can be grown in the reactor. And from interiors, we moved in exterior environment. This is a project that it's it was very dear to us. You may recognize again Giacomo and Lulu, a few years younger. And this was really just as we came out of the lockdown in 2021. We were able to complete this first playground, the air bubble, and the first biotechnological playground in Warsaw, in Poland, which really demonstrated the possibility to use this type of technology to create playful spaces where the quality of the air is drastically improved from the urban environment as we are used to. Again, microalgae literally feed on nitrogens, on carbon monoxide, dioxide. So they are essentially treating what for us is pollutant, is dangerous for our health as food. And that's the kind of beauty of this idea of symbiosis with the modern human. It's not just a philosophical idea, it's an actual fact of life. These organisms are quite literally kind of symbiotically exchanging with us on a daily basis. They feed on what we emit, and they emit what we feed on. This is another version of it. It's no longer a playground. It's a relaxing space. It's what we call restorative space within the garden of Helion Neon. And so the interior, it still has this kind of playful nature, but at the same time, it's mostly for adults to gather and to discuss and to have meetings and to maybe do some yoga sessions and just simply enjoy being outdoor in a kind of beautifully mitigated environment. And finally, before I conclude, I want to show you the last step of this process, which is now taking us to trying to create a first product collection which really embodies these ethos of circularities and biodigital. We call it Photosynthetica Gardening Collection. Is essentially a gardening collection or a collection of gardening products. And the first one, of course, is our hero product, as we like to call it, is the air reactor, which is essentially the first desktop photobioreactor. There is nothing like that on the market. It's basically just enable everyone to grow microalgae such as spirulina or chlorella at home in a very simple and practical way. Again, the philosophy of design, you can see it, is all dismountable, is all just interlocking, and there is no glue, no screw, it's all reversible. So it's really about also bringing out, exposing what things are made of. It's kind of about breaking the black box of design that we've become accustomed to. Where we don't know what's inside, right? And this has been now followed by a series of other products. These are called herb pots. They are essentially planters, which are 3D printed with compostable polymers. These are algae-based polymers. 30% in the biomass is algae-based. So they have these beautiful fibrous textures. They really feels a bit like bark, and their design is, of course, reminiscent of the bark of a tree. And they can host just simple normal pots, but kind of transform them into little sculptural objects where, again, you kind of lose a little bit the distinction between the plant and the vase or the pot, and again, what's natural, what's synthetic. And so that's also a little bit the game that we're trying to play here in kind of blurring once again the boundaries. And we made also special tools that are all compostable and that you can use to plant, to do essentially just the regular gardening activities. And finally, we are now bringing to life a bigger version, which is kind of made of components. It can be used for larger plants or even in the outdoor to protect and to interact with existing trees in parks, in urban parks. And once again, providing this sort of interesting blurring of the line between what is actual biological and what is actually man-made. So to conclude, I leave you with this little quote from Mario Carpo in the world of yesterday. technology was mostly intended to mechanize nature. That's what modernity or the modern project was all about, to make nature more efficient. Whereas today, technology has begun finally to naturalize machines. And with that, the way we live, we work, and hopefully also we will build a better and more sustainable future. So thank you for your patience. I hope that was clear enough, even in this sort of not ideal sliding format. And maybe now I can stop sharing. So if there is any question or interaction you want to have, I will be happy. And I hope really it was clear enough. Thank you.
Hi, Marco. Thank you for the great presentation, inspiring lecture. I'm Rafael, also from the editorial team at Architecture Hunter. And we'll now to the Q&A part of the session. But don't worry, we could see the slides very clearly. It was a great presentation.
It came across. Good. I'm glad, because it's always very difficult from far away to understand if if things make sense or if people are not really seeing anything or whatever. Anyway.
Oh, it was great. The videos also were great. We could see and hear them. So
Perfect.
no worries.
Thank you.
And I'd like to remind everyone that you can now send your questions through the Q&A tab so we can read it to Marco. So I already have the first question here, which is, you have developed projects such as Air Bubble and other systems that integrate algae and biotechnology into the built environment. Yeah. What have been the biggest challenges and key lessons learned when applying such experimental solutions to real-world projects?
That's a very good question. I mean, look, obviously one of the key aspects of these projects is that we kind of really started to believe that photosynthesis, or the actual photosynthetic process, that it's very common to all plants and trees and of course microalgae. In fact, maybe not many people think about it, but microalgae were among the oldest organisms on Earth, were like the first organisms that began billions of years ago to create oxygen, which then lead to the emergence of the atmosphere that we now breathe. So they're really part of the kind of whole history of the biosphere. They are extremely capable organisms in terms of photosynthesis. So the idea is that we came to believe that it's about time that we think about photosynthesis not just as something that belongs to the world of woodlands and forest and the natural world, but really they can become a technological system of our cities, of architecture, right? So like we have electrical systems, we have hydric water systems, we have energetic systems, and and we can have also photosynthetic systems. Why not? And the shift there is that microalgae provided photosynthesis with incredible efficiency, to the point that you can, in a reactor that you've seen, it's about 10 liters of algae in it, you can generate the same amount of photosynthesis that a mature tree would generate, but obviously in a fraction of the space. And again, this is for thinking of a photosynthetic architecture. That's really exciting, because it allows you to imagine all kind of way to integrate these into the spaces that we inhabit, right? Even when they are small or compact, like it often happens in our cities. And so I think the main challenge at this point was not so much, let's say, technical in that sense, because really the organisms do most of the work. I think it's really a cultural challenge, and that's where I think design and designers have a big role to play. Of course, the biomass industry exists already since many years, so we're not the first one to cultivate algae, right? But we are the first one that challenged this perception that algae are something that is a little bit disgusting, that you may find sometimes in kind of ponds and seas and so on, and actually that you can bring them right in your living room, in your home, in your office, and they look wonderful and they are amazing, and they do a lot of work for you and with you. So that's the shift, that's the challenge. If you can, as a designer, first of all, train yourself to see beyond the kind of conventional assumptions of what things are, and then you have the patience to design, engineer, the kind of systems that don't exist, but they are not, it's not rocket science, to be honest. It's mostly a question of, care to the detail, testing, being able, I've had them in my home for like about 10 years now, right? So this system, so, they're tested because I've been living with them for so long. So, and then, slowly you bring them to the bigger audience. And then, of course, there is another challenge there, which is that they have to be accepted, they have to be understood. And normally the first thing that everyone says is like, oh, the maintenance, how do we maintain this system? Because everyone wants living stuff, everyone wants green stuff, but no one wants to take care of it. Or at least it's not they don't want, is that they don't know how to do that, or they are not used to do that. And so all of a sudden, when they see like a lot of plants, a lot of things around, they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? If I don't do nothing, they're gonna die, they're gonna look horrible. And in fact, they do. I mean, you have to do something. So, but doing something which is not maintenance, when you work with, is not a machine, when you work with living organisms, doing something is like gardening, right? And gardening is good for you. It's good for your brain. It's good for your, general well-being. It's a fantastic thing to do. So why not bringing gardening to your office or to your home and so on? So I think that's where, again, the narrative of design, a well-designed product, a well-designed environment makes a whole difference, because all of a sudden people kind of intuitively become capable, and then they become enthusiastic, and then they become involved, and then they start inventing their own stuff, because all of a sudden they have this biomass and they're like, well, I can do a smoothie with this. Oh, I can put them in the dough and I can do the spirulina bread and blah blah blah. No, so all of a sudden you don't have to do anything at that point. Things just take off on their own, and that's where you can, I think, engender big changes from relatively small acts. And so even a product, even a small scale product, can have the power to transform a city, if you want, to change the way, I don't know, millions of people provide themselves with vegetable proteins, for example, rather than meat-based proteins, and so on and so forth, right? So there is at that point a kind of endless possibility, and that's where the whole idea of sustainability, and I always like to say that, becomes exciting, becomes generative, becomes creative. So it's no longer the idea of the sustainability as the kind of, like, oh, I do less of this, I don't do that, don't switch on the light, don't use the water, don't, this kind of don't, this is not something that humans or even animals, for that something they would ever do. I mean, we're not trained, we're not programmed to do stuff that is a negative. We are programmed to do stuff that we become passionate and excited about. And that's how we are. And so it is this kind of generative, exciting, gardening-driven sustainability, which I think has is what we talk about when we talk about radical approaches. If that's the topic, right?
Yes, thank you. I have another question, which I think is from someone who have met you before. His name is Marcos Frandoloso. He said, "Good morning, Marco. It is a pleasure to reconnect after the Otrivin Air Lab workshop in London in 2022.
Yes.
We are currently developing research on microalgae photobioreactors integrated into façades in southern Brazil, under a subtropical climate, drawing on many of the inspirations and references from Ecologic Studio. This is a pioneering initiative in Brazil. I would like you to comment on the limits and barriers to their application in context with climatic variability, particularly in temperate climates."
Yeah, I mean, of course, when you think about the growing organisms in a specific context, you are looking at the microclimate as your starting point, and there are really several hundreds, if not thousands, of strands of microalgae or cyanobacteria, and we only use a very limited number of them at the moment. But even in this limited number, which could be probably 20, that are the one that the industry uses most of the time, there is enough variability in terms of the kind of capacities of these organisms to adapt, that that gives you a lot of room for playing. So let's say once you know your environmental microclimatic conditions, first of all, you would decide and pick different strains of algae based on their ability or their preference for growing in those conditions. So for example, spirulina really enjoys warm temperature, grows really fast when it's about 30 degrees, 35 degrees, whereas chlorella prefers cooler, fresher temperature. And so, you could either alternate seasonally, or you could choose one more than the other. That's the first kind of thinking approach. Second, of course, we are designers. We think of these always as part of a kind of larger system, like architecture, right? And so architecture, as much as it's doing work to protect us or to mitigate certain extremes, it can do the same with algae. So, if you grow algae within a facade, you're gonna have to think about the facade not as a layer, but as a kind of deeper system where essentially you can create different layers which have different roles. Like, for example, algae don't particularly like direct sunlight. They need a lot of light to grow, but diffused is much better than direct sunlight, okay? Because direct sunlight stresses them. So if you're putting algae in a facade as in a glass in front of everything in a subtropical climate, they would likely die very quickly. So that's where you need to work with shading, you need to work with scattering, you need to work with diffusing, and that's then you get a lot better results. So it's the beauty is that it's not really only about thinking in one layer. It's really about thinking as the whole system as a kind of architectural system. So where architecture becomes part of the organism well-being and vice versa, right? So that's for me what is very interesting about that. And also, by the way, in 2 weeks I'm gonna be in Brazil and with Claudia as well. I mean, just in case I want to say, I'm gonna spend 3-4 days in Rio, and then we will be in the south in Porto Alegre for a lecture and so on. So in case there are some Brazilian friends that want to join, that would be possible.
Maybe you can reconnect with Marcos who sent the question. I think we'll jump into the last question because we have to wrap up soon so we can have the next lecture. And many young architects are interested in this type of work, but often don't know where to begin. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start developing research-driven bio-integrated architectural career?
It's a good point. I mean, obviously, it's a lot easier now than it was about 10 years ago, because academically now, I think many universities have programs and departments and labs that are actually dedicated to biodesign, and there are different versions of it. There is something like called biointegrated design. It's a bit more technical. Then you have biophilic design. It's a bit more kind of producty interior. Obviously, landscape architecture, like in our case, the synthetic landscape lab is part of landscape architecture, but it's very much operating across many scales. So landscape architecture is a very good starting point. It's a discipline that for many years has always been the kind of the little sister of architecture. But I feel that right now it's kind of almost turning the other way around. Like landscape, it's where everything starts. It's where you kind of draw not only inspiration for design, but also really the kind of material and the energy to create what comes next. So I think landscape architecture is a great starting point. And so that's basically for whoever is approaching, let's say, undergrad or once you complete the study, it's a bit more tricky, I have to say. I think entering the industry or the work environment and continue to pursue this type of research is still quite challenging, unfortunately, because it is how can I say? I think despite all the interest, of course, the building industry is quite resistant to change, is quite slow to adapting. It's very much engineering driven, it's very much technologically driven, which often goes against the bioparadigm, because the bioparadigm by definition, it's soft. It's about soft technology. It's about biotechnology. It's about technology of life. That doesn't go down very well with the. So that's a more tricky paradigm. For us, it was always a collaboration between academia and practice. Our practice has grown as a kind of a in evolution, in coevolution with our academic research. So maybe I would say still that is the best approach. I would say, first of all, if you are enthusiastic, just start doing your own experiment, because it is not that hard. You can, start growing anything. You can start, developing your materials. You can start developing your little algorithms that you can do. And then, maybe at the same time, you can do a little bit of teaching. You can do a little bit of research yourself. Maybe at some point start a PhD. But, it's a kind of a process. But I think right now, with the feeling that these type of paradigms are beginning to be very, very very well received, I think it's probably very soon that also the industry, or let's say bigger companies, bigger practices, will have their own dedicated biodesign team. So I believe there will be more and more positions opening up in that field as well. Even so, I would say it is a very good place if you want to practice independently. Let's say if you're looking at being your own version of architecture or your own version of product design, it is a very good place to start, because you can start making your things, you can start selling your things, you can start doing your little projects. Scale doesn't matter. Actually, like I said before, I think oftentimes small projects can have a huge impact. That's the beauty of thinking in this way. So you can develop projects on your own and with your community or with your friends or whatever, and actually begin to have a significant impact that you wouldn't probably have if you were working in a big company. So I think that's really the mindset, in my opinion, like thinking of scale in a different way, thinking of impact in a different way. Let's say more from the bottom up, more from the kind of systemic point of view. And I think always try to be consistent with what is your sensibility. I think oftentimes the industry will try to drag you in a different direction. Will try to say, no, but the plants, they're weak, they're gonna die. No, let's do this. Let's 3D print something, big robots, etc. We use robots, yes, okay, but you have to think about in terms of technology of nature. Now, how do you look at it from the soft point of view first? What's the soft logic? What's the logic that you're building into the project? Then, like you can use all kind of technologies to make it happen. But the principle, it's what counts.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the presentation, for your time and answering everyone's questions. We have to wrap up for the next lecture, but I'd like to thank you again.
No, it's been brilliant, and thank you for coming up with such a stimulating topic. I think it's a good moment to rediscuss what sustainability has meant to be or to mean to us, and that's a lovely thing to do. So I'm really thankful, and hope to see you again soon, at some point, maybe live, who knows. But for now, have a good afternoon, yeah, and have a good lecture next.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Marco. And before we move forward, I really would like to sincerely thank you for this presentation. Even with a few technical issues, it was absolutely worth it, truly inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing your work and insights with us.
Perfect.
And thank you, Rafaela, as well, for the thoughtful moderation. And now it's with great pleasure that we welcome our next speaker. Michael Green is a globally recognized architect, speaker, and author, widely known for his pioneering work in bio-based sustainable design and for helping lead the global mass timber movement. As the founding principal of MGA, Michael Green Architecture, he has shaped some of the world's most significant timber buildings, and his firm has received more than 50 international awards for design excellence, including multiple Governor General's medals, RAIC Innovation Awards, the American Institute of Architects Innovation Award, and recognition as RAIC Firm of the Year. MJ has also been honored with Architecture's Best in North America Firm Award, and most recently recognized as the best sustainable firm in the world. Michael is also an influential voice beyond practice. His TED Talks, including why we should build wooden skyscrapers have helped bring the conversation about timber construction to a global audience. He has advised governments on mass timber policy and co-authored foundational texts such as the case for tall wood buildings, which have become key references in the field. Through both his buildings and his advocacy, Michael continues to reshape how we think about materials, cities, and the future of sustainable construction. So, Michael, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you guys can all hear me okay. I'm gonna share
Yeah.
here. Can we see my screen? Are we okay? I'll go full,
Yeah,
I'll go full screen here. There we go.
perfect. We can see it.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Hi from Paris. So I am an architect in Vancouver, Canada. I've just been at a conference here in Paris that's a conference on wood, and I thought I would tell you the story a little bit about what we do and why we do it. And it's fundamentally based on our value system as a practice. From the beginning of our inception, we decided that we would try our hardest to build in lowest carbon solutions. And based on where I live, that means building with the only material I can really build with that's truly low carbon, and that's timber, and to use as little steel and concrete as possible. And I thought I would share the story of why. Living in Western Canada, it means that wood is very prevalent for us. And the ability to design in wood is a truly magical thing. Our practice builds projects all over the world, actually. So this particular project I'll talk about in a few minutes, but is in California. It's for Google, and it's one of their main headquarters buildings. But we have projects here in Europe. I'll show you a project we've just finished here in Paris, and again, tell you the story of why we believe in it. Some of you will know the word mass timber or cross-laminated timber. And if you do know the word mass timber, it actually comes from a book that I wrote long ago that introduced it as a kind of generic word for very large-scale wood products that allow us to build really interesting buildings and large-scale buildings. But I thought I'd start the talk, and these are, for many of you, these will be things you already know, but I think it's always really helpful, not knowing everybody in the audience, just to remind us some fundamental facts about the built environment and the context with which why we need to change how we approach things and change very quickly. Because for 202 years ago, in 1824, Joseph Fournier first identified the idea of greenhouse gases that could trap heat. And I think it's really incredible that that happened 202 years ago. But 130 years ago, we first calculated that there was an impact of carbon dioxide specifically, and that there was a theory that fossil fuels could create the kinds of greenhouse gases that would create the context for climate change. 88 years ago is when we actually figured this out. We actually had concrete evidence through scientific knowledge that there was this core direct connection between man and the greenhouse gases that were impacting climate and what that climate could be predictably changing. And 37 years ago, and this is an important date for me, is when the International Protocol of Climate Change began. And the reason it's important to me personally is that I graduated in 1989, the same year as the IPCC was created. I graduated as an architect. I worked for a world famous architect named Cesar Pelli from Argentina originally, but practiced in New York and Connecticut. And I realized that all through my education, there was no conversation about really the environment or climate. Although I graduated in the same year of the IPCC, when the global scientific community really had formed a consensus around climate, architecture failed to really understand, see, or act. And worse yet, I think there was at that time, for anybody that's my age, a kind of attitude towards sustainable design or environmental design, as we talked about it more then, as being not important design. It was treated as a sort of not as important aspect of theoretical architecture and thought at the time. And there was a real tragedy in this because as architects, it's our duty to stay with the context of the time and more so even be part of a futurist belief and understanding that science and where science is leading us is important for us to predict because we make a world around us that hopefully lasts for generations far beyond our own. So many of you will know this statistic, but I always use it as a reminder for many of my audiences, was just that 42% of anthropogenic greenhouse gases do come from the built environment, the making and operating of buildings. And you all may know that in that context, we often sort of think about cars, trains, and planes, or planes, trains, and boats, but we that's really a fraction, almost half of what the impact of buildings are globally. And where I live in Canada, it's buildings are about half the problem. In the United States as well, it's about half the problem. So depending on where you live, this is a profound problem that most of the public don't know about. And that's a really strange thing. I speak at a lot of global climate conferences, and often I'm one of the very, very few people talking about the built environment, and yet we are arguably the single largest and most important voice in change, and we need to act that way. At the same time, we need to act in response to this reality that we need to build about 230 trillion square meters, sorry, of buildings over the next 30 years. And to do that, that's basically like building one New York City every single month for the next 30 years. That's how much building we need to build, which is an incredible amount. And if we do it using today's technology, we're in desperate trouble. And so these are the thoughts that really drive my practice, and this realization that we are moving far, far too slowly. We need to make far greater advances at far greater scale and at a scale that can respond to this idea of one New York City needing to be built every single month, which means, you know, we need to light a fire under everything we do, and we need to do it in a really practical way with practical, really solutions that can be built today using technology often that already exists today. So again, just as a reminder about of that 42% of global impact, about 14% is embodied, meaning the materials we choose, and 28% is the operational, meaning how we heat and cool buildings. And just as a reminder, many of you know this already, but I'll share it because it's fundamental to our work. Of the four big structures that have built the planet, wood, masonry, steel, and concrete, really these three all have a fairly large energy and climate footprint, and only wood actually gives us an opportunity to sequester carbon in the built environment, and to obviously harness the power of photosynthesis, as you just heard in the last lecture, to use in the process of making the materials. I mentioned mass timber. Cross-laminated timber is a very popular conversation now worldwide in architecture, but these panels really have taken on this idea of building very large scale panels of glued together wood products in a cross-laminated and there are other formats of this that make up a family of products that we call mass timber, allows us to build on a very different scale than we ever did before and in a very competitive way against the materials like steel and concrete in this built environment. I'm here in Paris. I first introduced this idea about 15 years ago here in Paris with this proposed project that didn't happen, but it was a 34-story tall wood building. And the reason I show it is that we needed to learn ways in the early days, 10, 15 years ago, or really almost 20 years ago, when I first wrote the concept of how to do this, these tall wood buildings. We need to find tools that we could use to describe to the public why this was actually not only a good way to build from an environmental point of view, but a safe way to build both structurally and for fire and all the obvious questions that we always get when we present the idea of building big buildings. But structurally, what we were able to show is that the Empire State Building could have been built entirely in timber. And we did a full engineering exercise to show that this is possible. The Empire State Building at 102 stories tall is what revolutionized a lot of the conversation globally about tall buildings. And we knew if we could start to show and use these tools of how to communicate with the general public, we could kind of communicate the power and capacity of natural products and wood specifically to do great things, which has been the sort of mission of my firm. So we do a lot of this research and innovation work and also communication work because it is not enough just to dabble in change. We need to promote change very quickly. And I have to admit that 10, 15 years ago, when I was first talking a lot about this publicly, the attitude within the architecture profession was that that will never happen. there's strangely in the design professions a paradox where we follow rules, we sit within the building code, we sit within zoning regulations and all kinds of regulations that sometimes make us forget that we actually have the power to be the change agents across the board in every aspect of the built environment. But we have to not just sit within our practices as designers, we have to actually speak up as designers. And so there was remarkable pushback to the idea of building tall. And yet I've just been at this conference where I was shown the first tall wood building built in Germany has already been built. The first tall wood building built in Switzerland has already been built. In Norway, in France, they were all presenting tall wood buildings that only 12, 15 years ago were considered impossible. This is actually the first tall wood building. It's not very tall that we built. It was in Canada. It's the second one in the world. The first was built by a good friend of mine, Andrew Waugh, in the UK, which is a little bit shorter than this, but in neither case were they very tall. But they allowed us to kind of showcase that using only wood products, we could build everything from the elevator shaft to the structure to the cladding systems to the ceiling systems to the fire stairs are entirely built in timber. The very base of the building has concrete, of course, but after that, it's an entirely timber solution. And we wanted to show that it was possible for natural materials to compete with man-made materials. And so this was the beginning for us of really creating the change. But what's most important is that when we finished that project, we were able to prove that the building itself was 88% less carbon. We did two different life cycle assessments using two different independent organizations, and it was 88% less carbon than a conventional building built in concrete or in steel of that same scale, size, and type. And so you can imagine just this 88% number was so important to us. We built this building 13 years ago now. It was so important to us to realize that if we have to build one New York City every month for the next 30 years, obviously, if we can reduce every building's carbon footprint by 88%, we're making a huge difference. Of course, we have to do more. We have to go to zero, but that's a very, very hard thing to get to zero. We need to at least get as close to zero as possible, but this was, for us, the beginning step. More recently, we've just finished this project. It is an all timber project. Actually, although it doesn't look all timber, it is an all timber project here in Paris, where I am right now. And it's a residential project, so I'm just showing it sort of for aesthetic reasons. But what I wanted to show also is just that these buildings are at the beginning of a design change for our cities as well, not just to build more sustainably, but also to think about scale and opportunity, and also to think about the aesthetic choices of what these buildings might look like. In this case, we're just starting a project and it's 55 stories tall. It'll be the world's largest buildings made in wood if we built them. And I have to say if, because some of these projects, don't make it through the entire process. And strangely enough, this project's in a town called Milwaukee in the United States. And if you don't know where Milwaukee is, it's right here. And the reason I like to show it on a map is it's right next to, it's about an hour train ride from Chicago. And Chicago and New York City is where most tall buildings, started in the world. And there was a race between Chicago and New York to build taller and taller. And that really set off in the 1920s, 1930s, this kind of race for the way we build cities today in bigger and bigger buildings. And what's interesting is Chicago built a lot of the world's tallest buildings for a long time. The Sears Tower was the tallest building in the world. And yet they have no interest in building big buildings in wood. But 1 hour train ride away in Milwaukee, they are open-minded to building these buildings. And currently, the tallest wood building in the world is in Milwaukee. And they've been willing, by the way, there's Vancouver where I live in Canada. But these buildings in the middle, this one is 35 stories, this one's 35 stories, this one's 30, and this one's 55, will all be built in wood. The one on the left of 35 is already under construction, and you're going to start seeing more and more of these kind of buildings show up. The reason I talk about tall is not because I actually believe in tall buildings, to be honest. I find them, they're not my favorite to design all the time. And they also, I think they're challenging to make very livable in cities. So I tend to not build super tall. But the reason I will build super tall is it's very important for us to show and prove to the public that we can build in this new technology. This is the first new way to build a skyscraper really in over a century. And it's important to find examples, build examples, to be able to say if we can build 55 stories, then of course it's easy for us to build 15 or 12 or 16. And that's really the driver for me in city building. I think our cities would do better to be a little lower and a little more horizontally dense. Important to be dense, but maybe 8 stories, 9 stories, 12 stories, like you get here in cities like Paris, is a more appropriate scale. But again, if we can demonstrate by building a 55-story that these lower heights are possible, then all of a sudden it becomes very easy for the public to understand and digest this level of change. So I'll just take a few more minutes and show a few more projects here, and then I'll take questions. But this is not a tall building, but it's a really important building for us. It's actually Google's headquarters in California. It's their very first mass timber building. The exterior, you see woods, that's actually in a closed cavity glazing system with movable wood louvered blinds that move open and move up and down based on the weather station that's located on the roof. So it transforms the interior. It prevents heat gain into the building, but it also it encourages daylight throughout the space. This is, again, a headquarters building for about 1,000 Google staff. It's a very large timber building for them and their very first one. And why I share it and why it's a very important building to us, this is the inside atrium space within it, is that we were really encouraged by the idea that Google, who are obviously a leading technological company in the world, are understanding that they can lead by example by choosing and to allow innovation in the built environment and build buildings like this that are very untraditional for them. That they can help show the rest of the world that these buildings are not just what are good from an environmental point of view, but they actually make better workplaces. We know that when we're surrounded by natural materials, that we learn faster, we heal more quickly, it reduces our stress levels. We can be more productive at work. We actually did a study with Google and started to look at and research the impact on the number of sick days that people are away from work. And what we find is when they're surrounded by natural materials, and wood building being a good example of it, it reduces the number of sick days. And for Google, given the scale of their staff, they see a massive benefit to those kinds of aspects of choosing to build a building. It should be factored in from their point of view into the real cost of a building if it actually means greater productivity or greater health outcomes for their own staff. And so they've committed to only build this way in the future, which is something that's really important to the future of building, that they're breaking this mold of traditional ways of building. So with Google, when we finished this project, we also did some measurements. I'm going to show you a couple more pictures. This is actually our second project with Google that's not quite open yet. This is an exhibition space for them. And it has a slightly different structure than the first project. It's still getting finished. But when we finished this project, we did an analysis again of a life cycle assessment of the building. And what we found when compared to the neighboring buildings that Google had finished with, truthfully, some world famous architects, recently finishing buildings at the same time, what they found is that our project was 96% less carbon than the neighboring buildings they had just built with others. 96% less carbon. That for them, was a profound understanding and shift in their way of thinking. And what I loved is one of the founders of Google walked through the building. He saw that he was told this 96% reduction, and he said, "Okay, what do we do to get rid of the last 4%?" And that's, I think, exactly the right question and exactly the right kind of person that creates great companies like Google or technologically innovative companies. But we need, as an industry, to at least get the 96% down, and then we all need to innovate to get the last 4%, which truthfully is hard. Glass, aluminum, and concrete do have a footprint, and they're hard to get rid of without offsets, which we typically don't use in the process of how we think about this. So for us, this is the motivator. And since then, we've built buildings from universities like this one, housing projects in British Columbia where I live for our First Nations, for our Indigenous communities, or this is a project that would be prefabricated and sent far to the Canadian Arctic by boat in order to create a Nuktuk language center for the Inuit people of the Canadian Arctic. Or in this case, a museum we're building right now in British Columbia, where I live, and I'll show you the inside, which is the largest mass timber cultural building built in North America so far. And it has many spaces like this. Obviously, it's still under construction, but it has many, many spaces that are built like this that are very robust, very beautiful. In this case, this is a research facility and museum. And it gives you a sense of kind of just the scale and beauty of the possible spaces. This is a city hall, and this uses a different type of mass timber. And I'm just going to kind of flip through a couple slides. This is actually a project in Paris. We're hoping will come back soon that we've been working on. Again, all in timber. All the buildings you see here will be timber in Paris. And then the last images I'm just going to show you is that what we are finding is that not only is the story about what is our best choice from lowest carbon materials in our community, it's not always a transferable story depending on where you live in the world, what the lowest solution would be. So I like to remind people it's not that we can do the exact same thing everywhere and solve the problem. There is a regionalism to this. But what we've come to believe is that we need to do many things. We need to address climate change. We need to build with materials grown by the sun whenever we can. We need to build in a more cost-effective way to reduce the cost and more increase the affordability of our housing for many people around the world. And we need to learn how to do that. And more, we're doing that through prefabrication. And because wood is actually much lighter than steel or concrete, prefabrication is much more practical with it. And a good example is this project I'm going to show you, which is actually for backcountry skiers. It's in British Columbia in our high mountains. That's a huge glacier you're looking out the window at. And I'll show you, I'm just going to end with this. It's a pretty strange project to end on, but this project sits in a provincial park in British Columbia. It's again for backcountry skiers. It takes them 2 days to ski here. And this is a little video. I'll just let it play as we go. And I'll kind of conclude with this. But this is the beauty of the place I live. I'm surrounded by incredible forests, the ocean, and incredible mountains. And the privilege of building in this very special spot meant that we had to find ways to build as low carbon, obviously, but also to power everything without any external source. There's no road that comes here. And so this building will be built, prefabricated, and built mostly with helicopters. Helicopters are not the most green solution, but luckily we're actually also designing a helicopter terminal for electric helicopters. So we're starting to see pretty great technology happen there. But the prefabricated nature of this that wood allows us to do means that we're actually able to build in these beautiful remote settings in a much more sustainable way than we might have just decades before. And so and do so in a much more cost-effective way. So I like to think that these ideas of sustainability also have these great benefits across the board towards creating more livable communities with reduced stress, as I talked about, with a lower environmental and a lower carbon footprint, and ultimately can allow us to build with new technologies in a more cost-effective way, kind of wrapping together all of the issues that we as architects need to start thinking about much more than we have been. And with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing in a second here and start taking questions. I hope I've got my timing okay. So let's stop share here.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, Rafael.
Thank you for the presentation. What a nice landscape to end the presentation with this video, an amazing project. So yeah, thank you for the whole presentation. We really enjoyed it. And we'll now go to the Q&A part of the session. So reminding everyone to send in your questions in the Q&A tab. We already have a first one. In the Tamiria building, Shigeru Ban used a highly bespoke artisanal timber-only joint system that avoids all steel connectors. As you push for the Eiffel Tower moment of mass timber skyscrapers, do you see this pure timber connection system as a viable future for high-density urban construction, or must we rely on hybrid steel and wood connectors to achieve the scale and speed needed to solve the global housing crisis?
That's a really good and really informed question. I think if you look in the details of Tumedia, it's the intent was in all wood, but there's actually some um, careful orchestration on the detail. I would say it that way to be polite. I think the hard thing with all timber connections, and T-Media is a really good example, is it requires oversizing your timber a lot. And so there's this balance between using a very small amount of steel and a little bit more or a little bit more wood. And I think it's good to analyze the pros and cons. I love an all wood connection. I think realistically it's going to be a little while before we get a fully cost-effective way that doesn't mean we overbuild the wood to make the joints work. I would like to think that we can get there in other ways, alternatives to steel, but we're a little ways away from that. It's a great question and a really interesting one. Thankfully, the steel is so there's so little steel effectively in the joints. Your footprint from those is still relatively modest. Really good question though.
Thank you. The next question is from Andrews. Thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. For tall timber buildings, what are the biggest challenges in design and delivery? When do the height-related constraints shift, and what are the key long-term durability risks?
So let's go backwards. Long-term durability is an excellent question. It's really important. I think this is important depending where you live, but generally true that we always protect the wood with the exterior envelope. We don't expose wood to the exterior that is a structure, and we think that's just good practice. I mean, where I live, that's good practice, whether you're building in steel, concrete, or wood, to protect the structure, and that's the long-term durability issue. There's no reason these buildings can't last for many centuries quite easily if the envelope is well protected. So the height constraint issue, the height limit, I think there's a point probably, and I don't know what exactly that point is, where the quantity of wood starts to just not make as much sense. I think we should really actually ask the question, at what point does height at a certain point really matter? Like, do we really need 100-story towers everywhere? You could argue in some places it makes some sense with incredible density of cities, but for the most part, I actually think that the chase for height is a bit of a mistake in most from an urban development point of view and doesn't create more livable cities. I think that may be a better question because even in steel and concrete, some of the things we're doing to make these super talls work is incredibly wasteful in my opinion. So I don't have a specific number. There's no question you could build 100 stories. I just don't know why you would, and I wouldn't want to, other than that kind of breakthrough Eiffel Tower moment. What was there was a third one. I've already forgotten. It was durability, how high, and what was the third? The beginning of the question.
Specifically, how do we deal with the gap between the high demand for oh, sorry,
Oh,
I
yeah, yeah.
already, yeah, not this one. Okay, what are the biggest challenges in design and delivery? When do the high related constraints shift, and what are the key long-term durability risks?
So, some of the challenges, it depends where you live, right? So access to mass timber is not universal. If you're importing mass timber from the other side of the planet, it might not make sense. Although the carbon footprint of transportation is typically only 1 or 2% of the footprint of the product. So it's still worth looking at. But I don't think that this is a sustainable concept unless it becomes more universal to different regions of the world. I think the product design, the products have to evolve to be regional in the long run. Gum and other trees in the Southern Hemisphere can be really fast growth and actually can make great products. And we need to think about really testing and making that possible. So access to products is a big part. Access to good engineering is a big part. Access to contractors that know how to build this way. I don't think that's as hard, but it's pretty easy to learn how to build this way with some support. Um, but then the biggest challenge is getting governments and developers to come on board and understand that they have to shift the traditional way they build and measure the cost of buildings in a new way. We do a universal. I actually gave a little TED talk on this once. That's about how poorly we do in measuring the true cost of construction, and because we don't factor in all these externalities in the cost of construction, the impact on the environment, the impact on noise in their community, the impact of time, shutting down neighboring businesses. The truth is, wood buildings would become much more cost competitive if we were more wholesome in the way we actually evaluate costs between buildings. And a lot of clients steer away from these buildings because they measure in this old school system, and that's got to change. So there's a lot. There's a big mouthful in that, but there's a lot going on to make it work.
I have another question here that I think relates a little bit to what you have already talked about in terms of the high buildings. If mid-rise density is often more sustainable and livable, why do you think society still equates progress with high? Is this something architects need to actively challenge through build examples?
I mean, there's so many beautiful examples of mid-rise height density and all around the world. I think this is a bigger conceptual sort of explanation, but I think we need to face the sort of hyper-capitalism approach to building that says, I can maximize my profit if I just build super tall on a very small piece of land. That's a driver for tall more than I need to live 100 stories above the ground. The driver is the economics that I can make more money if I build, again, very tall on a small piece of land. And I don't know that that's the correct metric for how we should build our cities. And so as architects, it's very hard, right? It's hard to turn down a commission, especially a big tower commission that pays well. But we should exert our value system on why to build tall. And maybe there'll be places, that it makes sense. But for the most part, I don't think anywhere in the world that I know of really should be building beyond a kind of mid-rise density, which just creates stronger connective communities. And that's important.
Yes, I agree. And to wrap up, we have the last question here. For young architects who deeply care about climate change but feel constrained by market realities, budgets, or conservative clients, what advice would you give? How can they push for more sustainable material choices and lower carbon solutions, even when they are not yet in leadership positions?
That's an awesome question. So, the first challenge when you're young is trying, and it's not always easy to do this, but to find a place to work that aligns with your values. If you search out, if you think about it this way, if a firm is trying to hire, it's a competitive place to hire sometimes as well. And if everybody's going to the firms that are more sustainable, they're going to start noticing that as well. But that's the power of your voice, even at a young age, to choose the places that share your values. That's your first step. If you can't do that, it's equally important to bring educational tools into your workplace when you're young and say, hey, can we watch this movie? I'd like, ask your boss if we could all have an evening movie night and watch some movie about a sustainable issue you're interested in, or do education courses. You can lead the education of a firm even as a young voice in the firm. In fact, leadership will see that as you acting as a leader, and that's important. So your voice is stronger than you think. With clients, I'll be honest, it's like dating. When you say no to clients, they come towards you. When you when you chase them, they run away from you. It's just like dating. And so you want to be pretty, clear. Like, I don't build concrete buildings. I've had clients say to me, well, it'd be good for you to do a concrete building. Why don't you do a concrete building? And I just say, no, thank you, and hang up the phone. And I had forgotten this, but I'd given a lecture about a year ago, and an engineer came to me the other day and she said, you said this thing to me I've never forgotten. And I'm going to repeat it because I actually think it's kind of funny. She said, somebody in the audience asked you why you won't build a concrete building. And apparently my answer, and this does sound correct, was just as simple as saying, well, because I have children. And that's it. Like, that's it. When if I tell a client that, or a client sits in the room, do you think anybody is going to challenge that idea? No way.
Right.
Everybody wants to be on the right side of history. Just make sure you find the tools to teach people what the right side of history looks like.
Perfect. That's an amazing answer, Michael, to wrap up. So thank you so much for your time again and for accepting the invitation. It's truly an honor for us to have you here in our webinar series. So thank you again.
Super fun.
And also thank you to our audience. And for those who are still here, I'd like to remind all of these webinars are recorded and will be available for free on our website next week in case you want to revisit it or send it to someone who is not able to join today. And next month, we'll continue the webinar series with a very interesting topic, which is focused on women shaping spaces. So we'll see you again all soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.